Alignment garden, end of October 2020, and today we're going to talk about Plumeria. So I've been growing Plumeria for about 5 years now, and I've learned quite a bit along the way. It's a very easy tropical in its preferred zone of 10 or above. If you live or even visit Hawaii, you'll see Plumeria grows just wild there. So in general, Plumeria love sun. They need sun in order to flower and grow. But the Phoenix, Arizona sun is a little bit too intense for it to be in all day long. So you want to just take a bit of that intensity off of it with some shade cloth or offering it a microclimate that provides afternoon shade. So here, where I have these Plumeria planted out, is south exposure, so they do get sun all day long. And you'll notice that I have a structure up, and on that structure is 30% shade cloth. So these Plumerias do get some shade in this area from the cloth. And you can see here I don't have shade cloth coming into this shade house. So this does get some direct sun here, and you can see the signs of that. There are some areas where the leaves got scorched just by the intense direct rays of the sun there. As we get deeper in, we don't see that issue as much. So certainly if you're gonna plant Plumeria in ground, think about location and try to provide some relief from the afternoon in the summer. Winter is another challenge here. This area that you see here is full of Plumerias right now, but back in January 2019, I pretty much lost all of my Plumerias and had to start over that following spring. So that is a big challenge. Plumeria really do not like temperatures dipping below freezing. And if you live in this area, especially the outskirts of Phoenix where it gets a little colder, you could easily get into the 20s, down to even mid-20s. When a Plumeria is exposed to that, it can freeze back. Mine actually got so severely damaged with a week in the 20s that it froze down to the roots and completely killed the Plumeria. So just note that if you're growing in ground, you're going to have to protect in summer, and then in winter you'll need to put some kind of frost protection around them. You can do a PVC structure with some frost cloth, and then you'll need a heat source. And that's what I've done for my Inca Gold, which I'll show you over here. This is quite a large specimen that I've been growing since 2015. So to ensure this one gets protected, every year I construct a PVC structure, tent it with some frost cloth, and then put a heat source like a halogen lamp underneath when nights are going to dip below freezing. That has kept this plant alive. Why it's so bushy right now, because it never had any dieback or issues. So as we're talking location, if you're growing your Plumeria in containers, you have a lot more flexibility. You can move it around. You can see some Plumeria here in containers. I have this on the east side of my home, so these all get afternoon shade. And in the wintertime, I can move them to a sunnier spot. The other advantage with container growing is when it does get below freezing, it's very easy to pull these into your garage and overwinter them there where they're not going to have any damage. Some people will do a hybrid and they will container grow their Plumeria, and then they'll actually plunge them in the ground. So dig a hole and put that pot in the hole. And that'll help keep the roots a little cooler, because our summers here can be very intense, and the pots themselves, the containers they're in, it can get very, very hot beyond what the air temperature is, can really fry the roots. So to help cool them off, plunging is a nice idea here, at least in the summer. If you want to be conservative and make sure that you don't risk killing your Plumeria, and you don't really want to go through the hassle of frost protection, I definitely recommend doing container growing bear in mind that they're not going to grow as big or large as they will in the ground. So let's talk about soil media. Plumeria needs something that's very fast draining. So if you're going to container grow them, I'd recommend a mixture of half cactus mix and half potting soil. You can also throw in some perlite. That'll help drainage. You just want something that's very well draining. Plumeria do not like wet feet. You don't want anything dense. Definitely don't plant it in native clay soil. That's sure to kill a plumeria in a pot. Now for an in-ground planting, it's going to be a little bit different. Our soil here is not very well draining. You know, it's that thick clay, hard clay. So I dig half of that out. And I use that to berm up the plant or just, you know, move it to another location. And then I will dump in, fill an equal proportion of cactus soil. So something like this. I actually prefer Nature's Way, just don't have it at the moment. That one also has some lava rock in it, which is acidifying. So I'll throw in some mycorrhiza, which will help create a network that supports stronger root growth. So recommend throwing in a tablespoon of elemental sulfur. That'll help start acidifying your soil. You can also put in a few cups of lava sand. That will also help acidify the soil. So I essentially mix that all in with the other half clay soil, just to get a nice even mixture. And then put the plant in. Plant or cutting. You can start, you know, your plumeria by buying a cutting. There are a lot of nurseries online that provide that. Just make sure you do that in spring. On watering, you know, that's always a difficult question because there are so many variables that go into it. I can tell you what I do on watering, and for this location, with this shade cloth up, I water these guys in the heat of the summer every other day. I put down with something like this plumeria, you know, probably would be a 10-gallon size if we were to pot this up. That's about how much water I put down at each watering in the summer. As long as you amend the soil, and that water is going to drain pretty well. Like I mentioned, plumeria really don't like wet feet. But if you have a medium that's well draining, the water's not sitting there, it's going down. We're out of the hundreds, it seems, finally, and we're into the 90s. So fall and spring, I'll back off to every few days, you know, every 4 days, and they'll be fine with that. In winter, you don't really want to water them at all because they're dormant at that point and they can't use the water. You know, if anything, maybe once a month. But generally, we get some rain, so typically I don't water in the winter. And that's true if you've got them in pots or you've got them in the ground. You know, once they lose those leaves, you don't want to water them. Okay, on feeding now. I have many people asking me, how do I get my plumeria to bloom? You know, they'll tell me that they've had their plumeria for years and years and it's never bloomed. Well, plumeria are special in their dietary needs, we'll say. They need a very high phosphate number in order to bloom. So my go-to in spring, once I start to see leaves emerge, I will start feeding my plumeria every couple weeks with the product like BR61 that you can see has a very high phosphate number, 58. That middle number is extremely high compared to the others. Now you don't want to continuously feed your plants this all year because you can actually lock up your soil and prevent the plant from actually being able to absorb nutrition if you overly saturate your soil with phosphate. So I will only do this for the first couple months of spring. Then I will switch to something like this. This is a more even 20-20-20. You know, you don't have to use this ratio. This is what I use. And it's a water-soluble fertilizer. These both are, which is why you want to do this more often than a slow release. So I'll go to a 3 to 4 week schedule on this. Now another option is you can get a slow release Osmocote. There's one called Excalibur that I've used. I just have not found that it's done great for the blooming. If you really want your plumerias to bloom and grow a lot, the water-soluble food in the ratios I just mentioned will really help out. Another thing that I can suggest is feeding with some Epsom salts once a month. That helps really, you know, keep these leaves green. If you're having some yellowing leaves, that's a good thing to give it to help it out. Gives it the trace minerals it needs. Another thing you can do with Plumeria is if you know you're hesitant to put a very high phosphate fertilizer in your soil, you can opt to feed it through a foliar spray instead. So basically take that solution, you know, put it into a backpack sprayer or a pump and just spray down those leaves. It'll allow that food to get to the plant right away through the leaves. On pest control, we really don't have many issues to worry about here. Plumerias do not get disease like they tend to in Florida or somewhere where it's much more humid. There's no issues of rust or, you know, bacterial leaf spot or anything like that. I haven't had issues with that where I need to spray a fungicide. But I will mention, if you see your Plumeria stems have these white spots running along the branch, that's actually due to aphids. So often in springtime is when they like to really go after plants. They'll bite into this soft tissue, and that's just basically the sap. You know, inside the Plumeria it dries, and you'll see lots of little spots. Now it's not going to kill your plant. I haven't actually seen that it really affects the plant all that much. But if you want to prevent aphids or kill them off, when you see that, then just go ahead and hit your Plumeria with some neem oil. You know, just spray that down, and that should get rid of the insect problem. And just because I know people are going to ask, these holes that you see around here, these are not gophers. I actually discovered they're whiptail lizards that like to dig around this area. I have a lot of mulch in here, pine mulch, that's nice and soft. And so the whiptails like to go in here searching for bugs. And also this is how they deposit their eggs. They'll actually dig a hole, cover up the egg, you know, to allow it to hatch. So not something you really have to worry about. It can disturb the roots, but I've never found it to be that big of a problem where I need to worry about lizards. It won't be as active once it gets cooler. While we don't have a lot of pest issues, I will mention an issue you can have, which is if you do take on the risk of putting your Plumeria in the ground, you know, and you don't frost protect it, the problem you could have is branch rot. Depending on the severity of that rot, it could be an issue. If it's simply that the tip froze back, which happened to this Veracruz, you can see there it just stopped growing. You know, it came out in spring out of dormancy, pushing growth on this side, on the right there, but on the left didn't. And what happened in turn is, you know, this branch popped out below, so it encouraged new side branching. I can see a node right here as well. Now let's say it's more severe and you didn't just get tip damage, but the actual branch has some rot in it. As soon as you see rot, when it's black and squishy, cut that off. That's not going to improve, and it can actually descend and make things worse. So just cut it off to where you get nice green tissue and that white healthy sap flowing. Let that callus over and your plant should be fine. It's as if you pruned it. If the rot is so bad that it's actually in the trunk, there isn't much you can do, sadly. At that point the plant is pretty much gone, which is what happened to me a few winters back. So that is the risk of, you know, putting these out here in the cold. On size management, you know, if you go and get a compact grower dwarf, something like Divine, you're not really going to have to worry about pruning that much. It's going to naturally stay fairly compact, more bushy. Variety like Firestorm really favors a tall height. And so I actually lost my first Firestorm a few years back in a monsoon storm where it just got split in half because it's so top heavy. So I have done a video on pruning, but the basic thing is, you know, if I wanted to shorten this plant, because it's too long, I could simply cut this right here, or here, or here. You just don't want to cut it, you know, all the way to the junction, because if you do that, you'll essentially stop any growth. What'll happen is on the sides, new growth points will start, because you basically stopped it, right? You've stopped the vertical growth, so the plant needs to find a way to sustain itself. So it's going to push out new nodes to the sides. You'll get multiple. So that's how we reshape our plants if we don't want something so long. And when you prune this off, this branch that I just showed you, yes, you can actually propagate that as a cutting. So you can, you know, put this in your garage or inside your home, let it callus for a couple weeks where the cut point dries, and then you can try rooting it in a pot or in the ground if it's the right time of the year. It's another way to get more plumerias. I hope this video helped answer some of your questions about how to grow and care for this plant here in our climate, Arizona 9B. You can definitely have success with Plumeria, and actually for a very hassle-free experience, I would suggest highly to do the container growing method. If you're more of a risk taker, you know, you can definitely put them in the ground. Just know if you're in one of those borderline areas and you get into the 20s, you're going to have to protect them. Happy fall and happy gardening.